When a loving father suddenly goes missing, his family is left searching for answers.
That wasn't like him to just disappear. It alarmed everybody.
My dad didn't do that. My dad was all about his kids. We were his #1 priority all the time.
Investigators make a tragic discovery in the remote Texas countryside.
In that swamp area, there are hundreds of snakes, alligators. It was a gruesome scene.
It was horrific.
As investigators shuffle a long list of suspects, a torrid romance comes into focus.
They didn't want the affair to end.
He was essentially willing to do whatever she wanted him to do.
Will I ever get the 100% truth? Probably not.
Unfortunately, when you keep secrets, they tend to bottle up and then explode.
A country boy at heart, Bobby Sexton loved everything about his hometown of Jacksonville, Texas.
My dad had 3 brothers and 2 sisters. They lived in the country most of their lives. He would give you the shirt off his back if you needed it, so a lot of people knew him. My grandpa had a roofing business, and that's what my dad did most of the time. If he wasn't doing that, he was racing.
Bobby's love for racing would also lead him to the second love of his life. Her name was Patricia Bingham.
My sister Patricia was more of a mother to me than a sister because she's like 12 years older than me. She was very, 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 very pretty. She loved to do the beauty pageants. She had God's gift of beauty.
In Jacksonville, Patricia grew up in a large, tight-knit family.
Me and Patricia shared the same mother, Linda Bingham. We lived on my grandparents' property.
A lot of people refer to that area as the Bingham family compound. Several members of the Bingham family resided on or near that property. They had a business of buying and selling junked cars to sell them for parts.
Due to her family's business, Patricia grew up with an appreciation for cars and developed a passion for racing.
We used to call her Speedy Gonzalez because she always had a heavy foot, and she wasn't scared to go fast. He got this little old truck, fixed it up, got it going for her, and started racing. She won every race she ever raced in.
Patricia's bold personality also extended to her love life.
She was very wild, very promiscuous. From what my grandparents and everybody said, she really didn't have kids her age, so she hung out with my aunt. It just so happened that my aunt introduced her to Bobby.
Bobby, he was a friend of mine. They met one night when Patricia wanted to go riding around with us. And from then on, they started sneaking around.
He was already married. And his oldest daughter was, I want to say she was probably anywhere from 14 to 16 years old. So she was nearly grown herself.
There wasn't nothing you could tell them. They were in love.
After a few months, Patricia went to my grandmother Dorothy and told her, hey, I'm pregnant. I think the situation was my grandparents said, now that you're pregnant, he's got to step up.
It was a way for them to get together and get married, but they wanted.
Bobby divorced his wife in 1991. That same year, he and Patricia welcomed their daughter, Chastity. 2 years later, they were married, and their second daughter was born shortly after.
My parents, they always took care of us. I was attached to my dad's hip. We grew up around a lot of race cars and driving race cars, racing, building them. My dad knew how to build a motor from the ground up. He knew a lot about cars.
To support their growing family, Bobby worked for his dad's roofing company. But his career took a hit when he injured his back on the job.
I don't know too much about his surgeries because I was little when all this happened. But I know he's had like 8. And my dad has a metal rod in his back. So he couldn't do much.
In 1994, Patricia gave birth to her 3rd daughter, but she received devastating news.
She found out she had ovarian cancer.
She went to a specialist in Dallas, and they told her that there was nothing they could do. She was going to have a hysterectomy. There was no way she could have another child, and they told her that. That devastated Bobby because, he wanted a son. So that took a strain on their marriage. But Patricia wanted to make things work for the girls.
By 1997, Bobby was able to return to work when Patricia's grandfather gave him a job at his mechanic shop.
It was a big shop where they worked on cars, and it was filled with wrecked cars. Everybody had their part in the family business. Bobby worked for my grandparents, and my sister cooked meals for the guys at the shop. They were happy.
But on the morning of February 21st, 1998, the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office receives a worried call from Patricia Sexton.
Patricia wanted to report that her husband, Bobby Sexton, was missing, that he had left the residence the night before.
According to Patricia, Bobby had received a call from his coworker, Willie Wright.
He was telling Bobby that Bobby needed to come down, unlock the shop because Willie had left the lights on and an air compressor running.
Willie was very adamant about him coming in, so Bobby said, okay, I'll come up and turn him off.
Patricia said Bobby left the trailer somewhere around 11 o'clock. He got into the Suburban and drove off, and that was the last time that she saw him. She went back into the house, and she went to bed. When she woke up the next morning, Bobby still was not home, and the Suburban was not there. She was upset, thinking something happened to Bobby. Normally, on a missing adult, we'll take the information down, but as far as an investigation, it's normally at least a couple of days to see if he turns up.
But Bobby's concerned family grows impatient and takes matters into their own hands.
That wasn't like Bobby to just disappear. So it alarmed everybody. My sister put up flyers asking for anybody that had seen Bobby, if they'd seen his vehicle, whatever. But literally nothing. It was like Bobby vanished.
72 hours pass, and there's still no sign of Bobby, so Patricia notifies authorities.
The sheriff's office put out a bolo, which is be on the lookout for Bobby and his vehicle.
Later that day, authorities receive word that Bobby's Chevy Suburban has been located.
Patricia actually called law enforcement to inform them that Al Clark had discovered Bobby's vehicle on the side of the road and had driven it back to the house. Al Clark was in a common-law marriage with Patricia's mother, Linda Gale Bingham, and they were living on the property owned by Linda's parents.
I got called by the sheriff's office, the dispatcher, that a man named Al Clark had found Bobby's vehicle. So I go out to the residence and look at the vehicle. It was a gruesome scene. There was blood everywhere. There was 2 to 3 inches of blood in the wheel wells. We knew that there was probably foul play involved.
My sister, Patricia, went to pieces. She knew something was wrong. The sheriff's department knew something was wrong.
Coming up, Investigators suspect a couple close to the victim may know more about Bobby Sexton's disappearance.
He wanted to know, how did you get Bobby's vehicle?
Al had been previously prosecuted for murder years before.
And a secret betrayal comes to light.
He wanted to get him out of the way.
I couldn't believe it.
2 days after Patricia Sexton reported her husband Bobby missing, his abandoned Chevy Suburban is the focus of a gruesome crime scene.
The turning point in the case that moved us from just a missing person into a homicide was the blood in the vehicle. There was just so much of it that we knew that something had happened.
Investigators turn to the man who found the Chevy Suburban, Al Clark.
Al Clark was a person of interest due to his criminal background and the fact that he found the vehicle.
Al had been previously prosecuted by me for a burglary of a building, and he was prosecuted for murder in Polk County years before. Al Clark's the type of individual that does not volunteer stuff. You have to usually ask him and get it out of him.
When pressed about how he came across Bobby's vehicle, Al admits he found it that morning by accident in nearby Diboll, Texas.
I believe it was on a Sunday. Al and my uncle, Stephen, decided that they were going to ride four-wheelers at a piece of property that my grandparents owned in Diboll. At the top of the hill, he told my uncle, hey, isn't that Bobby's Suburban? They got on the four-wheelers and went, and sure enough, it was Bobby's truck. So my uncle said, hey, let's call the laws, let's let them come. My stepdad just insisted that he drive the vehicle back to my grandparents. And that's where the sheriff's department met him and took possession of Bobby's vehicle.
Investigators ask Al where he was when Bobby disappeared 3 nights earlier.
He had an alibi. He was a truck driver and he was out of town during the time Bobby came missing.
After taking Al's statement, investigators speak with his common-law wife, Linda Bingham.
Al had left early that day to take a load of timber to Mansfield, Louisiana.
Mansfield, Louisiana was about 2 hours east of Jacksonville, and Linda said that Al had left that morning around 6 a.m.
About 10:30, his boss come to my house and said, hey, where is Al? Where's my truck and my load of timber? I said, ought to be sitting in Mansfield by now. He left early today. Way early. Well, it ain't there. And somebody told me my truck's sitting down in Maydale.
Maydale was just over 10 miles south of Jacksonville, not very far from Al's home, and Linda told police he didn't come home until early the next morning.
It was late, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, when I heard Al come in. He throws his hat down the couch and he says, I'm going to bed. Never says another word to nobody. It was strange because that just wasn't him.
Linda claims Al's actions were cause for concern.
When he got in that Suburban and drove that truck to my mother and daddy's house with blood running out the back end of it, I knew. In my heart, in my stomach, I know Al was involved.
Investigators learn Al was unaccounted for during the same stretch of time that Bobby allegedly went missing.
Bobby did go to unlock the shop around 11 o'clock, and he never did return back to the house. It was suspicious, especially with Al Clark finding the vehicle.
Linda explains the rest of the family has become equally suspicious of Al.
My grandfather, Buddy, was very inquisitive. He wanted to know, hey, how did you get Bobby's vehicle? Where did you find it? Where's Bobby?
Investigators question the uncle who found the Suburban with Al, but he doesn't offer any substantial information.
He claimed at the time that he didn't think much of it.
When investigators confront Al about the discrepancies in his alibi, he refuses to cooperate any further.
He was very irate. He said that he would not speak with investigators anymore until we had a court order or he had an attorney. We were suspicious, but we had no proof that he was involved in it.
Investigators next turned to Bobby's co-worker and the last known person to see him, Willie Wright. On Wednesday, February 25th, Willie sits down for an interview.
Willie, he was a good friend of my grandparents. He did manage the shop in the area. He didn't let people come on and steal things.
Willie confirms Patricia's story that Bobby had arrived at the shop shortly after 11 p.m. on February 20th.
Willie said once Bobby turned the lights off and locked the shop up, he left.
Willie thought Bobby went back home, and Willie went back to his trailer, and that's all he knew.
Investigators end the interview with Willie. Soon after, they receive an intriguing call about another co-worker of Bobby's, 29-year-old Michael Fielding.
Bobby and Michael, they were friends. They were childhood friends.
Michael's a country boy. He was good with his hands, good mechanic, tinkered with cars, so forth.
Michael Fielding's mother was very curious about the disappearance of Bobby Sexton. She talked to her son, Michael, asked him if he knew anything. Michael blew up, said he didn't know anything about this, and then stormed out of the house. Mrs. Fielding then called 911, spoke with the Jacksonville Police Department. She was afraid for her son.
Investigators immediately contact Michael and ask him to come in for an interview. The next day, he arrives at the sheriff's station.
The investigator for the Cherokee County District Attorney's Office interviewed Michael Fielding. It was what's known as a non-custodial interview, meaning that Michael Fielding was not under arrest.
Michael Fielding did tell the investigators that he saw Bobby Sexton earlier that day at the shop before Bobby was missing.
Michael claimed he was home all night and hadn't seen Bobby since earlier in the workday.
And he said that he wasn't involved, and he became irate to the point that he didn't want to talk to law enforcement anymore about this.
We did not believe he was telling the truth because of his nervousness and the way he was acting.
At the end of the interview, Michael was free to leave. That's when law enforcement began to place some scrutiny upon Michael Fielding.
Investigators dig into Michael's background, but there's nothing in his criminal record to suggest he's dangerous. 2 weeks pass without a sign of Bobby Sexton.
Law enforcement was just interviewing everybody and trying to explore every lead, and initially they did not have anything definitive.
Then on March 12th, a tipster provides authorities with a crucial lead.
A man calls into the sheriff's station and says that on the evening that Bobby disappeared, he saw Michael Fielding, but he wasn't in his own vehicle.
He was in Bobby Sexton's vehicle. He did notice an older man in the car that was intoxicated, and it was determined that it was Willie Wright. The more people that we were able to talk to, the more information we were getting that Michael and Willie were involved. It just all started adding up.
Those are the missing pieces of the jigsaw puzzle for the investigators.
On March 12, 1998, nearly 1 month into the search for Bobby Sexton, investigators in Cherokee County, Texas, receive a game-changing tip that places Michael Fielding and Willie Wright in Bobby's vehicle the night he disappeared.
A friend of Michael Fielding said that early in that morning of February 21st, he got a call from Michael saying that he was out of gas and that Michael needed to come by and pick up a gas can.
He did give Michael Fielding the gas. He didn't really think anything of it. When newspaper articles come out, it jars the memory of people, and then they start realizing, this wasn't right, and they'll call law enforcement and, tell them what they know.
If Willie and Michael are responsible for Bobby's disappearance, investigators need to determine why. Conveniently for detectives, Willie Wright gets arrested on March 17th for public intoxication, so they use this opportunity to question him in custody.
I think at that time Willie was in his 50s, and he had been itinerant, a little bit of a vagrant. He looked terrible. He was aged well beyond his years.
Willie was told that there was witnesses that placed him with Michael Fielding in Bobby Sexton's vehicle that night, and Willie broke down.
He crumbled like a rose petal in August and confessed to all of this.
Willie confirms investigators' suspicions that Bobby is dead.
Willie confessed that he got Bobby to come down to the shop where Michael Fielding jumped up and shot Bobby in the chest with the shotgun.
Willie indicated he is the one that provided the shotgun that Michael Fielding used to kill Bobby Sexton. That he aided Michael Fielding in disposing of Bobby Sexton's body, loading it in the Suburban, and then going to the location to where the body was dumped.
Michael knew that area pretty well, so the decision was made that Michael Fielding would transport Bobby Sexton's corpse to one of those Exxon oil leases, leave his corpse there.
They had taken two vehicles so they could ditch Bobby's Suburban, but then ironically Michael's car ran out of gas. They got spooked, so they both jumped into Bobby's vehicle and found the next bridge to dump the body.
Michael Fielding stopped the automobile on one of the bridges over a creek in that area and threw Bobby Sexton's body over the bridge and into the underlying creek.
They disposed of a tire and a tire jack, both to weight the body down and because there was blood on it.
After they've dumped the body, they decide to abandon the SUV near Dialville, Texas, which is a short drive away, and they just left the Suburban there with the keys in it.
But the real bombshell drops when Willie reveals why Michael was involved in the murder of one of his oldest friends.
Michael Fielding was having an affair at that time with Patricia Sexton.
Michael and Patricia had been seeing each other since November for nearly 5 months. They'd met in secret at a hotel. Sometime in mid-February, Bobby found out about the affair, and there was an incident.
Bobby had followed them to the Southern Motor Hotel in Rusk. Bobby Sexton banged on the door, kicked on the door. Michael Fielding answers the door. Bobby sees what's happening, and they engage in a fist fight right there.
According to Willie, the fight ended when Bobby stormed out.
Bobby went home, got his girls loaded up, and went to his mother's house. And that's where he stayed.
I didn't know about Michael till Bobby brought it out and opened. They were having an affair. I couldn't believe it. Michael Fielding and Bobby went to school together. They were raised together.
Eventually, Patricia did say that her affair with Michael was over. Come home, the children need both a mother and a father. Bobby gave in and did go back, and that was just before the murder.
But the affair continued.
Law enforcement reasonably started to assume hey, maybe Patricia Sexton is involved in the disappearance of Bobby Sexton.
Following Willie's statement, he agrees to show investigators where he and Michael dumped Bobby's body.
They drive around looking, for the spot where Willie had helped Michael throw the body in. There was possibly 200 bridges that they had gone to with no luck in finding the body. And it wasn't until they moved over to Anderson County that Willie made the statement, "This is it, this is the spot." And the investigators saw what appeared to be a body floating, and that's what led to us recovering Bobby Sexton's body. Once it was on the bank, we noticed that there was a shotgun hole in the chest area. He was decomposed.
He had been exposed to weather, the elements during that time, which can be cruel. And then, of course, you've got the snakes and turtles and fish in the water. And it was horrific.
The body was taken to Dallas to the medical examiner.
A subsequent search of the property where Bobby was allegedly killed turns up valuable evidence.
We walked all around the property, every inch of the place. There was a couple leaves that had a red substance on there that was later determined to be blood. They typed the blood, and it was the same type as Bobby had. My thinking is that somebody may have done something to clean up the area, because with a shotgun blast, there should have been a lot of blood, but there was no evidence found in the mechanic shop itself.
Bobby Sexton's body was identified through the autopsy, specifically the disc that was in his back. The autopsy indicated that cause of death was shotgun blast, and death was very quickly after that.
Willie Wright was charged with tampering with evidence. His part of obtaining the shotgun for Michael and helping dispose of the body. On March 26th, Michael Fielding was taken into custody and charged with capital murder of Bobby Sexton.
My sister was devastated. She didn't want to believe that Bobby was gone. None of us did.
That was the end of her racing career. She took her fire suit, her racing stuff, and pictures, and she put them in the casket with him. And she said, "I'm done. I won't ever race again." And never did.
When investigators confront Patricia about her affair with Michael, she denies the claims and insists that her marriage to Bobby was stronger than ever.
The looming question was, why would Willie Wright make that detail up? At this point, investigators didn't believe Patricia, but they needed more evidence that she knew of the plot to kill her husband.
When investigators finally sit down with Michael Fielding, he makes a stunning admission.
Michael Fielding, to his honor and to his benefit, readily admitted that he murdered Bobby Sexton.
But he said, without question, the driving force was Patricia Sexton.
More than a month after Bobby Sexton was reported missing, Michael Fielding has implicated Bobby's wife, Patricia, in the crime.
Fielding said Patricia told him she didn't want to be with Bobby anymore, she couldn't take it anymore, but she couldn't divorce him because he would get the kids.
Michael tells investigators that Patricia had initially come up with an idea to get Bobby arrested.
Patricia wanted to plant some narcotics in Bobby's vehicle, but that plan didn't work out. So that's when they decided that Bobby had to be murdered. And then Michael said Bobby was receiving disability benefits and that upon his death, Patricia would get a lump sum, which was supposed to be over $100,000. She wanted the money and the fact that she wanted to be sure Bobby did not get the children, and that led to her setting up the plan with Michael Fielding to end Bobby's life. Michael said that Patricia had threatened to end their affair if Michael didn't go through with this. Michael still didn't want to do it, but he didn't want the affair to end, so he carried it out.
According to Michael, Patricia came up with the plan for Willie to call Bobby to the mechanic shop on the night of February 20th.
Michael said that Bobby had walked to the shop because it was just down the street from the house.
Michael Fielding was hit behind a car and jumped up and shot Bobby Sexton in the chest.
Michael told investigators that Patricia called and asked if the deed was done.
Then Michael had asked her, where's the keys to the car, the Suburban? She said she did not have the keys. They're probably in Bobby's pocket. At that point, Michael Fielding reached into the pocket and retrieved the keys to the Suburban.
Michael says Patricia arrived to the shop just after midnight.
Patricia came and got the keys and then went and got the Suburban, brought it down, and that's when he and Willie Wright loaded the body in the Suburban. Michael Fielding believed that Patricia had cleaned up the crime scene, but he didn't see it, so he couldn't testify to it.
When asked if any of Patricia's family knew about the murder, Michael claims that Patricia had included one more person in the plot to kill Bobby.
Michael Fielding told me he and Patricia and Dorothy, Patricia's maternal grandmother, conceived the plot to murder Bobby Sexton.
Patricia Sexton was telling Michael Fielding and Dorothy about Bobby abusing her.
Patricia said Bobby kind of resented her because she couldn't give him a son. So he got very physical. Every time he got mad, he would punch a wall.
Dorothy and Patricia Bingham believed the only way Patricia would ever get her kids is for Bobby to be out of the way and ultimately result in his murder.
At first, Michael Fielding, he said no. Dorothy Bingham and Patricia just kept at him, and finally he agreed to do it.
Fielding said that Dorothy gave him surgical gloves and said he could use those in doing the murder, so there was no physical evidence.
There was also no physical evidence connecting Patricia to the murder.
While it's clear to investigators that Michael and Patricia are involved in the murder, Michael's confession isn't enough to arrest Patricia and Dorothy. Several weeks later, an unexpected informant comes forward.
Patricia's mother, Linda, was caught with narcotics and was arrested. When she was brought in to questioning, she was wanting to give up Dorothy and Patricia's involvement if law enforcement would talk to the DA about her charges, which they agreed to talk to them.
Ultimately, Linda confirmed that her mother and her daughter were in this plot to kill Bobby Sexton.
In August of 1998, authorities take Patricia Sexton and Dorothy Bingham into custody. During questioning, both women maintain their innocence.
At this point, Patricia admitted that she had an affair with Michael. She said that when Bobby went missing, she knew in her heart that it was probably Michael, but that she was too afraid to say anything. She claimed that she had no first-hand knowledge of the murder, so she couldn't truly be sure.
Patricia said Michael had been lying to us.
She refused to implicate her grandmother.
Their stories just didn't make any sense, and the evidence and statements of other people concerning the involvement between her and Michael and all that. She just denied everything. Patricia and Dorothy were charged with capital murder.
There's no more serious crime than capital murder. Pretty good chance you got indicted, you're going to get executed.
Coming up, as the case heads to trial, authorities fear that conflicting stories and unreliable witnesses will upend their case.
That happens a lot in cases like this. When people get in trouble, they start pointing the fingers at one another.
I don't think that justice was done.
In Jacksonville, Texas, authorities have arrested Michael Fielding and his lover, Patricia Sexton, for the capital murder of Patricia's husband, Bobby. Also implicated in the crime are Bobby's co-worker, Willie Wright, and Patricia's grandmother, Dorothy Bingham.
That was a hard hit for us. Once my grandmother was arrested, CPS stepped in and took us.
I was 6. My sisters were 5 and 4. What were we going to say at that time? We still weren't comprehending what was going on.
Investigators still have questions about Al Clark's alibi.
Al Clark and Bobby Sexton did not get along, but the evidence that the investigators came up with was circumstantial, and eventually Al Clark was ruled out as a suspect.
Unfortunately, in the months leading up to trial, Willie Wright passes away.
Prosecutors no longer had the key witness against Michael Fielding.
I started talking with the DA's office about ways to try to save Michael's life. The sentence that I negotiated for him with the DA's office was 35 years in prison. Part of our agreement with the DA's office was that he would fully cooperate with law enforcement, and that's what he did.
On April 20th, 1999, Patricia Sexton's trial gets underway.
There was evidence that the motive was at least twofold, that she wanted the kids and did not believe she would get custody unless he was out of the picture. She also wanted the benefits from the disability claim, even though it wasn't adjudicated yet.
Dorothy and Patricia, in my opinion, they were the ringleaders of all this. The way they kept telling Michael he needed to do this. Had they not done that, Bobby Sexton would still be alive, in my opinion.
But Patricia's defense team claims Michael had every reason to lie.
Our defense was he was in love with her. They were having an affair. That's all just a lover's triangle, and he was trying to get rid of a rival. We had some confidence that we could make the jury believe that Fielding was in this just as a jealous lover.
On the stand, however, Michael stands firm.
Michael relented that he had an ongoing affair with Patricia, and he was essentially willing to do whatever Patricia wanted him to do.
We believe he's up there lying, trying to put her in it. That happens a lot in these cases like this. When people get in trouble, they start pointing the fingers at one another.
The state's star witness is none other than Patricia's mother, Linda.
Linda Gail Bingham's testimony was a major part because she overheard some of the conversations with Patricia and with Dorothy. It was her view that Patricia acting with Dorothy were the masterminds of this plot.
What little I knew, everybody else was saying. And that aggravates me because people say, well, you're the one that sent her to prison. No. What I said, everybody else said. I wasn't going to lie. I'm not lying for nobody. My mother always said, as long as everybody just tells the truth, everything's going to be all right. Exactly what everybody did, and it wasn't all right.
Patricia's trial lasts 3 days. The jury deliberates for several hours, ultimately submitting their verdict on April 23rd.
We, the jury, find the defendant Patricia Sexton guilty of the lesser included offense of murder.
Patricia avoids the death penalty, but is sentenced to life in prison. Patricia's grandmother and alleged co-conspirator Dorothy Bingham is also found guilty at her trial in June 2000.
She received a conviction for engaging in organized criminal activity and murder.
Dorothy is sentenced to 30 years in prison, but she serves less than 3.
Dorothy Bingham's case was reversed by the Tyler Court of Appeals. It was determined that there was not sufficient corroborating evidence.
When my grandmother's conviction was overturned, it was the greatest thing. I feel like she was wrongfully convicted.
The fact that Dorothy was released, personally, I don't think that justice was done on her part, but, it's out of our control.
25 years later, Patricia Sexton continues to maintain her innocence.
There are a lot of innocent people that are incarcerated. And I will believe that she is innocent until the day I die.
I still have questions about everything that's happened. Will I ever get the 100% truth? Probably not.
Unfortunately, when you keep secrets, they tend to bottle up and then explode.
There's not too many days that go by that my family doesn't say something about my dad or talk about how they miss him or how things would be different if my dad was here.
It was very sad. Think of all the lives ruined. Think of families ruined. For nothing.
Everything a girl's mom is supposed to help her do. I didn't get that. Daddy-daughter dances, stuff that you go to with your dad. I didn't go to those. When I decide to settle down and get married, my dad doesn't get to walk me down the aisle. I'll never have a relationship with my mom.
The night was blacker than a crow's wing, and the streets of Brooklyn whispered secrets no one dared to speak aloud. On a cold December evening in 1998, the city seemed ordinary. Traffic lights blinked, subways rumbled, neon signs buzzed. But behind one unremarkable brownstone on 15th Street, something happened that would haunt New York for years. A young woman, 24 years old, vanished without a trace. Her name was Emily Harper, a name that once floated lightly through college halls and coffee shops, now etched into police logs, a ghost in the files. It started like any other missing person report. Worried roommates, a late shift at the diner, unanswered phone calls. But as the hours stretched into days, the familiar unease grew into a pulse of fear. No signs of struggle, no witnesses, nothing left behind except an overturned chair in her tiny apartment and the faint smell of perfume lingering in the air. Her cat, a scruffy tabby named Mr. Whiskers, was found huddled in the corner, wide-eyed, a silent witness to something no one could explain. Detectives arrived, early morning chill biting through their coats. The scene was sterile in its ordinariness, yet the tension was palpable, thick enough to taste. Every corner, every drawer, every shelf was examined with surgical precision, yet every lead dissolved into nothing. The apartment yielded no fingerprints other than Emily's own, no forced entry, no signs of theft. Her purse and keys remained untouched on the counter, her coat still draped over a chair. It was as if she had walked out into the night and simply evaporated, leaving the world behind, leaving a mystery that would linger for decades. Neighbors whispered about odd noises, shadows that moved differently, people who didn't belong. One elderly woman claimed she saw a man loitering near the fire escape that evening, but when detectives returned, he was gone, leaving only footprints in the snow that melted by morning. The case went cold quickly. Months turned into years. Detectives cycled through shifts, promotions, retirements, and still Emily Harper's name remained in the cold case files, a specter that refused to be exorcised. Every anniversary of her disappearance was marked with memorials in the small park near her apartment, candles flickering against the bitter winter wind, each flame a reminder that someone was out there, walking free, while the world remembered Emily in fragments, smiles, laughter, fleeting glimpses that now seemed like illusions. The community felt the weight of it, a slow-brewing paranoia. People double-checked locks, called friends at odd hours, and watched the streets with suspicion. The city, always vibrant, felt fragile, like glass trembling on the edge of a counter. By 2002, the NYPD had assigned a special cold case unit to comb through unsolved disappearances. Emily's file sat among hundreds, but her case stood out, not for the brutality, not for violence, but for its utter emptiness, the vacuum it left. Detectives pored over old witness statements, street cameras that barely functioned in 1998, phone records that were cryptic, every shred of evidence that might have once hinted at a pattern. They reopened the apartment several times, dusting for prints again, tracing the scent of perfume with specially trained dogs. Nothing. The city had swallowed her whole, and the law had nothing to hold on to. And yet, anomalies kept surfacing. A small piece of jewelry, a charm bracelet Emily was known to wear, appeared in a thrift shop in Queens in 2003. No one could trace how it got there. A taxi driver remembered picking up a young woman fitting her description near the corner of 15th Street, heading east toward the East River, but the timeline didn't match the disappearance precisely. Each clue was a whisper, a tease, a glimmer of hope quickly extinguished. Detectives began to feel the strain, the personal weight of failure pressing down. Every unanswered question was a shadow creeping over their shoulders, a reminder that justice is a slow, painful, often incomplete process. In the neighborhood, stories began to mutate into legend. Teenagers dared each other to peer into Emily's abandoned apartment at night. Some swore they saw lights flicker on the second floor, shadows moving behind the blinds. Older residents spoke of hearing muffled cries, though no one ever verified them. The idea that Emily might still be nearby, watching, trapped in some invisible cage, became a rumor that chilled the community more than her absence ever could. Psychics were consulted, amateur investigators prowled the streets with cameras, even journalists arrived, notebooks in hand, chasing fragments of a story that refused to form. Through it all, the police were methodical, relentless. Detective Harold Jensen, who had begun his career in 1995, took a personal interest. He was meticulous, noting patterns invisible to others, writing hundreds of pages of observations in the margins of Emily's file. He reviewed the phone records, cross-referenced taxi logs, and studied the apartment layout from every conceivable angle. One thing gnawed at him, the absence of forced entry. Whoever took Emily had not broken a lock. They had stepped into her life as if invited. That realization alone unsettled him. The killer, whoever it was patient, calculated, and familiar with Emily's routine. It was not a random act. Then came a breakthrough, or what seemed like one. In 2006, a DNA database was expanded. Tiny traces of biological material found under Emily's fingernails were finally tested against national records. For years, nothing matched. But this time, there was a faint trace, a partial match to a man with a criminal history in nearby New Jersey. His file was thin, only minor convictions, nothing violent. Detectives were cautious. Years of disappointment had taught them restraint. They re-interviewed neighbors, combed through old leads, and began building a timeline of his known movements in December 1998. It was fragmentary, inconsistent, yet intriguing. The man had been seen near Brooklyn at the exact time Emily disappeared, but no one could place him inside the building. He vanished from the radar immediately after her disappearance, resurfacing months later in a different state. The cold case unit began to dig deeper, re-examining everything. They interviewed Emily's friends and family again, revisiting every mundane detail they might have overlooked. Her last known interactions were scrutinized. The barista who served her coffee, the clerk at the video store where she rented films, the neighbor who lent her sugar that December night. Each person was interrogated with polite precision, Their statements compared against every scrap of data collected years prior. Every contradiction, no matter how minor, was flagged, cataloged, analyzed. The detectives moved like archaeologists sifting through dust, searching for fossils of truth in layers of time. Meanwhile, the media reignited interest in the case. Podcasts dissected Emily's life, news segments revisited her disappearance, and social media, though still in its infancy, buzzed with speculation. Amateur sleuths posted maps and timelines online, creating crowdsourced reconstructions of the night she vanished. Some proposed theories that were plausible, others were wild, bordering on delusional. But all of them fueled one thing: the collective obsession with a woman who had disappeared into the shadows of the city, leaving only questions and anxiety behind. As the investigation deepened, the pattern of the killer's movements began to emerge. He was careful, methodical, leaving almost no trace. Surveillance footage from nearby streets, long thought irrelevant, was re-examined. A frame, nearly imperceptible, showed a figure matching the description of the suspect, lingering near Emily's apartment minutes before her disappearance. Though grainy, the footage offered the first visual confirmation in years. Detectives stared at the screen, breathless. Time had not erased the ghostly outline of a man who had eluded them for nearly a decade. The community, reading these updates, felt both relief and renewed terror. The person responsible was still alive, still walking the streets somewhere, and the case was far from closed. Detective Jensen, who had never let go of the file, pushed forward relentlessly. He traveled to New Jersey, interviewed the suspect acquaintances, dug into financial records, phone logs, car rentals, anything that could place him near Brooklyn in December 1998. Slowly, pieces of a puzzle began to align. A taxi ride here, a bank transaction there, a conversation overheard at a diner months earlier, all pointing to a man who had managed to erase himself from the world while leaving one life in ruins. Each revelation was a mixture of satisfaction and horror. Satisfaction that progress had been made. Horror at the thought of the calculated coldness required to abduct a young woman and vanish. And yet, despite the mounting evidence, the case remained maddeningly complex. The suspect had covered his tracks with precision, left no clear confession, no witnesses who could testify definitively. Each step forward revealed another layer of obfuscation, another riddle to untangle. It was a game of patience, a chess match played across years, with lives suspended in limbo, communities haunted, and families waiting for answers that were always just out of reach. Meanwhile, Emily Harper became more than a missing person. She became a symbol of unresolved grief, a cautionary tale whispered across Brooklyn, a name repeated in police academies as an example of cases that tested the limits of investigative persistence. Detectives carried her story with them, a reminder that some shadows cannot be fully illuminated, that time can erode memory, but not obsession, and that even the smallest clues can eventually crack open the hardest mysteries. By the time 2010 rolled around, nearly 12 years after her disappearance, the investigation had evolved into something almost cinematic in scope. Old files were digitized, phone records meticulously logged, suspects' movements mapped with GPS and cell tower triangulation. Modern forensic techniques were applied to evidence that had sat untouched for over a decade. Fiber analysis, DNA phenotyping, and trace chemical testing provided insights that were unavailable to the original team in 1998. The detective team worked like surgeons dissecting a case that had long resisted closure, each cut precise, each discovery more shocking than the last. And then, in a quiet, unassuming lab in downtown Manhattan, a breakthrough came. A match was confirmed. The DNA that had lingered unclaimed for years finally found a counterpart. It was the suspect, the same man whose partial DNA had hinted at involvement years prior. The evidence was irrefutable, and suddenly, the cold case that had haunted New York for over a decade was no longer just a file gathering dust. It was alive again, pulsing with the possibility of resolution, with the looming question of justice, and with the chilling realization that the person responsible had walked freely among them all this time. Detectives prepared for arrest with a mixture of relief and dread. The city, long accustomed to the quiet despair of an unsolved case, braced for the shockwave. News outlets began to circle, neighbors speculated, families held their breath. Emily Harper's name, once confined to whispers and memorials, now surged into headlines, reminding everyone that the past never truly disappears, that time may dull memory, but cannot erase the demand for truth. And through it all, the streets of Brooklyn remained the same, cold, indifferent, yet now carrying the weight of revelation, the echo of years spent chasing shadows, and the lingering dread that some horrors, no matter how fully illuminated, leave marks that never fade. The morning the arrest was announced, Brooklyn woke with a tremor, as if the city itself had exhaled a decade of tension. News vans lined 15th Street, their antennas stabbing at the gray sky. Reporters crowded the sidewalks, cameras zooming in on the familiar brownstone where Emily Harper had vanished 12 years ago. Residents peered through curtains, eyes wide, mouths tight, unsure whether to feel relief or fear. The suspect, a man now in his early 40s, had been taken into custody quietly, without incident, yet the shock rippled through the community like an electric current. Faces hardened, whispers escalated into murmurs, and the faint scent of winter air carried the weight of a story that had refused to die. Detective Harold Jensen stood outside the precinct, eyes fixed on the suspect's car being driven into the garage, a steel cage holding years of unseen horrors. For Jensen, the arrest was more than a procedural victory. It was a vindication of persistence, a testament to the refusal to let time erode justice completely. He remembered the first day he stepped into Emily's apartment, the chill of the floorboards under his shoes, the faint aroma of her perfume, the way Mr. Whiskers had hissed at him as though recognizing the intrusion. He had carried those memories for years, a mental photograph etched into his mind, haunting him during nights spent staring at ceiling cracks, wondering how someone could simply vanish without a trace. The interrogation room was sterile, fluorescent lights glaring, the smell of antiseptic clinging to everything. The suspect sat rigid, eyes darting, hands clasped in front of him on the table. His demeanor was calm, almost unnervingly composed, yet beneath the surface, every detective present could sense a tension that betrayed him. The silence stretched for minutes, the kind that presses on your chest, the kind that makes seconds feel like hours. Jensen entered last, the weight of 12 years pressing on his shoulders, and laid out the timeline, the evidence, the years of frustration and dead ends. The man's eyes flicked at photographs, Emily's face frozen in time, the overturned chair, the faint smudge of perfume, and for a moment, the room felt suspended between past and present, accusation and denial. "You were in Brooklyn on December 12, 1998, Jensen began, voice low, deliberate. "Near 15th Street, around 11:30 p.m. We have witnesses, surveillance, your own DNA under her fingernails. Every lie, every alibi, it falls apart. We know you were there." The suspect's lips twitched, a faint smirk, almost imperceptible, as if acknowledging a game that had gone too long. Jensen pressed further, relentless. "Emily Harper didn't leave on her own. She didn't vanish. You know that. We know that. This ends now." Outside the station, the community had gathered, news crews broadcasting live, neighbors clutching blankets against the winter chill, faces pale with anticipation. The arrest alone had opened old wounds, revived the ache of unanswered questions, and yet it offered a glimmer of hope. People speculated endlessly. What had driven the man to act? How had he avoided capture for so long? How could a single act of violence ripple through so many lives, leaving a city haunted for over a decade? These questions hung in the air, unanswered, pressing on the collective consciousness like a storm cloud refusing to break. Back in the interrogation room, the suspect finally spoke. His voice was low, careful, measured, almost rehearsed. He denied direct involvement at first, painting a picture of coincidence, of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the detectives were patient. They fed fragments of evidence, one after another: DNA matches, witness recollections, timeline inconsistencies, until the cracks began to appear. A pause here, a frown there, hesitation, the subtle shift of a hand. It was like watching a dam slowly fracture under pressure, the truth threatening to spill. Each revelation added to the tension, the psychological cat and mouse, the sort of game that had defined the pursuit for 12 years. Meanwhile, the city's press began to catch wind of what was unfolding inside the precinct. Headlines updated by the hour, social media comments swelling with speculation and outrage, emails and calls flooding the station. Bloggers dissected every known fact, replayed old footage from 1998, compared witness statements. The community felt both satisfaction and unease. 12 years had passed, and suddenly, everything felt dangerously close, the memories raw and immediate once again. The streets seemed to hold their breath, the brownstone now a landmark not for the crime itself, but for the years of waiting, watching, and wondering. As the suspect's story began to crumble under the weight of evidence, Jensen reviewed his notes, each page a meticulous account of questions asked and answers given. The patterns became clear: calculated observation, careful stalking, timing refined to perfection, understanding of Emily's habits down to the minute. Whoever this man was, he had studied her, followed her, orchestrated her disappearance with chilling precision. There was no impulse, no frenzy, no mistake, only cold calculation. The detectives felt the weight of that realization. A mind capable of such meticulous planning had gone undetected for years, manipulating shadows, exploiting gaps in memory, and using time itself as a shield. The interrogation stretched into the night. Jensen alternated between presenting evidence and listening, watching for the subtle tells that often betray truth. Sweat formed at the base of the suspect's neck. Hands drummed nervously. Eyes flickered to the clock. Then came a breakthrough. A phrase, a detail, slipped almost involuntarily, something the suspect could not have known without being present. Jensen pounced. "Where did you hide her?" Silence, the room holding its breath. The suspect's lips pressed together, then parted, a slow exhale. "By the river," he muttered, almost inaudibly. The words hung, impossible to ignore, a confirmation that broke the dam of years in a single utterance. Detectives immediately mobilized, reviewing maps of the East River, analyzing past tidal patterns, searching for locations consistent with the description. Boats were dispatched, dive teams prepared, helicopters scanned from above. Every layer of the river was inspected, every bank and inlet combed for evidence that had been hidden by time and tide. The search was meticulous, urgent, a race against both the environment and the fading memory of a victim whose life had been stolen. The city held its breath as the investigation shifted from theory to tangible action, from frustration to confrontation with the stark reality of what had been done. Meanwhile, the suspect began to unravel further under questioning. Small confessions, details he had hoped would remain buried, emerged. Each word added to the mosaic of horror, a chilling tableau of control, obsession, and a meticulous approach to crime. The detectives pieced together his movements, the night of Emily's disappearance reconstructed in painstaking detail. Witnesses who had been silent for years were re-interviewed, their recollections cross-checked against forensic evidence. A narrative began to take shape, one that had been obscured by time, but now emerged like a phantom in the cold light of the present. In Brooklyn, news of the suspect's partial confessions spread rapidly. Community members felt a mixture of vindication and terror. For some, relief that justice might finally prevail. For others, fear that the man who had haunted their streets for over a decade was capable of even more. Conversations in cafes, on street corners, in grocery stores were dominated by fragments of the case. What had happened, how he had remained undetected, what Emily's final moments might have been like. The city itself seemed to vibrate with a collective anxiety and anticipation, each echo of her name reigniting the pain and curiosity that had never fully subsided. As the night wore on, forensic teams worked tirelessly, retrieving the first physical evidence from the river area described by the suspect. Objects previously thought lost to time were recovered. A small piece of clothing, faint traces of hair, items that confirmed the detective's suspicions. Each item was cataloged, photographed, bagged, analyzed, a tangible link between the suspect and the long, cold mystery. The city seemed to lean in closer, listening to every update, aware that history was being rewritten before their eyes. The interrogation continued, relentless, a psychological duel that left the suspect visibly weakened. Jensen pressed, alternating between calm authority and controlled intensity. He knew the importance of timing, of patience, of exploiting the subtle cracks in a carefully constructed facade. Slowly, piece by piece, the narrative emerged. The man had watched Emily, studied her routine, isolated the moment, executed with precision, and then vanished into the urban night. There was no remorse, only meticulous recall, a chilling detachment that left detectives shivering. By early morning, the suspect had provided the final details necessary to close the narrative of Emily Harper's disappearance. Locations, timelines, methods, all aligned with the evidence painstakingly collected over 12 years. For the cold case unit, it was a culmination of decades of persistence, a testament to patience, diligence, and a refusal to let time dissolve the pursuit of justice. And yet, despite the resolution, the weight of the case lingered, a reminder that trauma does not end with confession, that communities carry scars invisible to outsiders, and that some shadows, no matter how fully illuminated, remain. As the sun rose over Brooklyn, a city that had learned to live with its secrets, detectives reflected on the toll of the case that had spanned more than a decade. Emily Harper's name, once whispered in uncertainty, now stood in the headlines, in police reports, in the minds of everyone who had known her story. The suspect was in custody, evidence in hand, confessions recorded, yet the echoes of fear, grief, and suspense would not vanish so easily. The streets, familiar yet forever altered, carried the imprint of an event that had tested the boundaries of memory, patience, and human resilience. Detective Jensen, staring out at the skyline, felt both relief and lingering unease. Justice had been served, in the technical sense, but the emotional resonance of 12 years of unanswered questions would persist. He knew that the community would slowly breathe easier, that families would feel closure, yet some part of him would always carry the weight of the night Emily Harper vanished, of the years she was missing, and of the man who had taken her so methodically. Brooklyn, too, would remember, not just the crime, but the relentless pursuit of truth, the chilling reminder that some mysteries, once unearthed, cast long shadows that stretch far beyond the moment of revelation. Even as the suspect was processed, fingerprints logged, DNA samples cataloged, and the precinct buzzed with controlled urgency, the shadow of Emily Harper's disappearance clung to Brooklyn like fog over the East River. Streets that once felt familiar now seemed alien, as if the city itself had absorbed the tension of 12 years of unanswered questions and was holding its breath, waiting to exhale. Residents moved cautiously, glancing over shoulders, murmuring to neighbors, sharing fragments of memories long buried. Every streetlight, every corner, every alleyway carried a ghostly echo of a night that had shaped the neighborhood in ways no one could fully articulate. Detective Jensen returned to Emily's apartment one last time before it was sealed as evidence. The room smelled faintly of mildew, dust settling over untouched furniture, the faint odor of perfume lingering as a spectral reminder. The overturned chair, once a symbol of chaos, now seemed a relic frozen in time. He traced his fingers along the windowsill, remembering the countless hours spent trying to reconstruct the night, replaying every conversation, every fragment of evidence. every tiny lead that had once promised progress and then dissolved into frustration. The cat, Mr. Whiskers, long since taken in by a neighbor, had disappeared from the scene, leaving only memories and the faint brush of fur against the floorboards as a haunting echo. Outside, journalists swarmed, cameras capturing every nuance of movement, every expression of law enforcement officials. Headlines flashed, cold case closed, 12 years of mystery ends, killer's identity revealed. Social media, still evolving in 2010, amplified every detail, creating digital archives of speculation, fear, and morbid curiosity. Podcasts dissected the evidence. Analysts debated the motives. Amateur sleuths constructed timelines that rivaled police reports in detail. The public, once content with whispered rumors and fragmented memories, now had access to the full breadth of the investigation. And with it came a collective reckoning with the reality of what had happened. Inside the precinct, detectives sifted through evidence recovered from the riverbank. Each item, Emily's clothing, traces of hair, objects displaced by time and tide, was cataloged with painstaking precision. The forensic team worked tirelessly, applying new techniques unavailable during the initial investigation. Fibers were matched, DNA phenotypes analyzed, trace chemicals compared. The pieces, long scattered, were beginning to form a coherent picture, revealing the meticulous planning of a man who had observed, calculated, and executed with cold efficiency. It was both awe-inspiring and horrifying, the juxtaposition of intellect and cruelty, method and madness. The suspect remained under heavy questioning, his composure gradually eroding under the relentless focus of law enforcement. Each question peeled away layers of deception, exposing a mind attuned to manipulation, a mind that had spent years perfecting alibis and avoiding scrutiny. Detective Jensen pressed carefully, alternating between patience and intensity, knowing that a single misstep could close the doors of confession forever. The man's story began to align with the forensic evidence, confirming details that had remained elusive for over a decade. Each revelation was a jolt of adrenaline, a reminder that justice, while slow, was inevitable when pursued with unwavering determination. Meanwhile, the community grappled with the emotional fallout. Families who had long mourned in silence found a measure of solace. Yet the relief was tempered by the stark reality of Emily's fate. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones, recounting memories of her laughter, her kindness, the mundane details of a life abruptly stolen. Schools held assemblies, community centers hosted discussions on safety, and local media revisited the story, reminding residents that vigilance and awareness are often the only defenses against such calculated acts. The social fabric, once strained by uncertainty, began to knit itself anew, cautious but resolute, informed now by clarity rather than conjecture. For Detective Jensen, the case was a personal crucible. Years of obsession, sleepless nights, and emotional weight had built an intimate familiarity with Emily Harper's life. The streets she walked, the routine she followed, and the night she vanished. Each step toward resolution was a mixture of satisfaction and dread. Satisfaction that the threads of evidence were finally converging. Dread at confronting the calculated evil of a man who had manipulated time and memory to conceal his actions. It was a delicate balance, a dance between triumph and horror, between relief and lingering unease. In the days following the suspect's confession, police organized a reconstruction of the events of December 12, 1998. Using maps, timelines, and witness statements, they recreated Emily's final movements. Surveillance footage from surrounding buildings, previously ignored or considered irrelevant, was reevaluated. Every taxi log, every bank transaction, every faint recollection from that night was examined under the scrutiny of modern investigative techniques. The reconstruction revealed a chilling precision, a calculated patience that underscored the suspect's capacity for control. Emily's disappearance was no accident. It was the product of methodical planning, careful observation, and an unsettling understanding of human behavior. The investigation also revealed small but significant details that had been overlooked in 1998. A security camera from a nearby laundromat, thought to be malfunctioning, captured a fleeting image of a figure matching the suspect's description near the brownstone at 11:28 p.m. Fiber analysis linked clothing fibers found on Emily's belongings to items in the suspect's possession. Phone records, long considered inconclusive, were re-examined using advanced software, revealing previously undetectable patterns of communication. Each new discovery added texture to the narrative, transforming a once opaque case into a compelling chronicle of crime and consequence. As the days turned into weeks, the suspect's psychological profile was constructed. Behavioral analysts examined his movements, decision-making, and interactions, revealing a man who had carefully observed Emily, calculated her routines, and exploited vulnerabilities with clinical detachment. There was no remorse, only a measured recall of events, an intellectualization of actions that was both fascinating and terrifying. Law enforcement officers, while committed to justice, could not help but be unsettled by the depth of calculation, the absence of emotional impulse, the cold mechanics of a crime executed with precision. The media coverage intensified, with national news outlets reporting on the resolution of a case that had remained a specter over Brooklyn for 12 years. Documentaries were proposed, podcasts expanded, social media buzzed with analysis and speculation. The public became intimately familiar with the minutiae of the investigation, the procedural steps, and the evidence that had been painstakingly gathered. For many, the story was a study in the persistence of law enforcement, a testament to the evolution of forensic science, and a chilling reminder of the lengths to which a determined criminal could go to evade capture. Despite the technical closure, emotional closure was more complex. Emily's family, while grateful for the resolution, faced the lingering pain of years spent without answers. The sense of relief was tempered by grief, the knowledge that the past could not be undone, and the understanding that trauma leaves enduring marks. Support networks, counseling, and community outreach were mobilized to help those affected navigate the aftermath. The city, while informed, also wrestled with its collective memory, balancing the satisfaction of justice with the recognition that the scars of fear and uncertainty are long-lasting. Detective Jensen reflected on the broader implications of the case. Beyond the personal and communal ramifications, there were lessons for law enforcement, for investigative methodology, and for the integration of emerging forensic technologies. The Emily Harper case demonstrated the importance of persistence, the value of revisiting cold cases with fresh perspectives, and the potential for breakthroughs even after decades of apparent stagnation. Each revelation reinforced the notion that time, while a complicating factor, is not an insurmountable barrier to truth. As the precinct finalized reports and evidence was cataloged for court proceedings, the city continued to absorb the narrative. Community forums discussed safety protocols, neighborhood watches were reinvigorated, and public awareness campaigns highlighted the significance of vigilance. The story of Emily Harper, once a cautionary tale whispered in private conversations, had become a public lesson in observation, preparation, and the complex interplay between opportunity and risk. The suspect awaited trial, facing charges that encapsulated years of suffering, investigation, and legal preparation. Prosecutors meticulously compiled evidence, witness statements, and forensic analysis into a coherent case designed to withstand scrutiny. Defense attorneys, while attempting to challenge aspects of the narrative, could not deny the weight of accumulated evidence, the confessions, or the corroborating physical findings. The legal process, slow and deliberate, became the final arena in which justice for Emily Harper would be formally sought. Throughout the city, the emotional resonance of the case lingered. Streets that had been ordinary again felt heavy with memory. Neighbors recounted experiences from the night of her disappearance, revisiting details they had long suppressed. Candlelight vigils and memorials continued, honoring not only Emily's life, but also the resilience of a community tested by uncertainty. Each remembrance served as a testament to collective endurance, to the persistence of memory, and to the enduring quest for closure in the face of prolonged mystery. Detective Jensen, meanwhile, prepared for his own reckoning with the case. The psychological toll of 12 years spent immersed in the details of abduction, investigation, and eventual resolution weighed heavily. Yet there was also a sense of accomplishment, a recognition that persistence, methodical attention to detail, and refusal to abandon the pursuit of truth had yielded results. He understood, however, that some elements of human experience, grief, loss, and trauma, cannot be fully quantified, mitigated, or resolved through investigation alone. In the quiet moments between press conferences, courtroom preparations, and forensic analyses, Jensen often returned to the initial images of Emily Harper. Her smile, her favorite coffee mug, the small personal objects that had survived the passage of time. These memories, combined with the stark realities revealed during the investigation, created a complex tapestry of reflection, sorrow, and professional satisfaction. The case, while technically resolved, left an indelible imprint on all involved. A reminder that the pursuit of justice is rarely straightforward and often requires navigating the murky intersection of human behavior, societal structures, and the relentless march of time. The arrest, confessions, and recovery of evidence marked a turning point not only in Emily Harper's case, but also in the broader landscape of investigative procedure. Cold cases, once considered dormant or unsolvable, demonstrated the potential for resolution through technological advancement, meticulous record-keeping, and the unwavering commitment of dedicated professionals. Each success story, while unique, offered hope to families and communities grappling with the unresolved disappearance or murder of loved ones, reinforcing the principle that truth, though delayed, remains attainable. And yet, even as the city absorbed the resolution, the emotional landscape remained fraught. Fear, grief, curiosity, and fascination intertwined, creating a lingering tension. Residents navigated streets, once again, mindful of the past, but cautiously optimistic about the future. Conversations shifted from speculation to reflection, balancing acknowledgement of the perpetrator's culpability with recognition of communal resilience. Emily Harper's story, though tragic, became emblematic of both the fragility and endurance inherent in urban life, a narrative that underscored the importance of vigilance, persistence, and the human capacity for both darkness and recovery. The courtroom was quiet, but the tension was suffocating, thick enough to taste. Brooklyn had waited 12 long years for this moment, and now it had arrived, yet the weight of anticipation only magnified the unease. Detective Jensen sat near the prosecution table, reviewing notes, evidence photographs, and timelines one last time. Every detail mattered, every word precise, every pause calculated. Months of investigation, years of persistence, and decades of frustration had converged into this room. Emily Harper's presence was palpable, lingering in the air like a shadow that refused to fade. The chairs, the polished wood, the muted light, all seemed to pulse with the echo of a night that had shaped a city, haunted a community, and defined the lives of those who had sought justice. The suspect entered the courtroom with a calm that unnerved everyone. His face, composed yet inscrutable, betrayed none of the tension that simmered beneath the surface. As he walked past, whispers rippled through the audience. Neighbors who had known Emily, journalists who had followed the case for years, distant friends and family members all drawn to witness the moment when a cold case, frozen for over a decade, would finally confront the person responsible. Cameras flashed, capturing every expression, every subtle movement. The energy was electric, a mixture of relief, dread, and morbid curiosity. No one could predict exactly what would unfold, only that the culmination of 12 years of investigation was finally here. The trial began with opening statements that were concise, deliberate, and loaded with intensity. Prosecutors recounted the events of December 12, 1998, painting a picture of Emily Harper's final hours with meticulous care. Witnesses were introduced, evidence displayed, photographs of the apartment, the riverbank, and recovered items projected onto screens for all to see. Each detail was a brushstroke in a chilling portrait. An overturned chair, the faint scent of perfume, fibers matched to the suspect's clothing, DNA under Emily's fingernails, phone records tracing his movements. The courtroom was silent. The collective breath of the community held in anxious anticipation as the narrative unfolded with precision and inevitability. Detective Jensen was called to testify, recounting years of painstaking investigation. He spoke of the initial disappearance, the immediate search, the countless dead ends, the frustration of hope deferred, and the persistence required to finally trace the suspect's movements. He described the subtle clues, the tiny inconsistencies, the pieces of evidence that had been overlooked in the early days. Every word carried the weight of 12 years, and his voice resonated with a mixture of determination, sorrow, and quiet triumph. Jurors listened intently, absorbing the narrative of patience and meticulous detective work that had ultimately brought clarity to a case long shrouded in mystery. Witness after witness was called. Neighbors recalled fleeting interactions, minor details that had seemed insignificant at the time but now took on profound meaning. Taxi drivers remembered rides, timestamps, and passengers' behavior. Friends and family recounted Emily's routines, the mundane aspects of her life that had been meticulously observed and exploited by the suspect. The mosaic of recollections, once scattered and incomplete, now formed a coherent and chilling account of events. The jury absorbed each fragment, slowly reconstructing the night of Emily's disappearance in their minds, aware of the meticulous planning and calculated execution behind it. As the trial progressed, forensic experts presented their findings with a clinical detachment that only heightened the tension. DNA samples, fiber analyses, chemical traces, all converged to establish a narrative of methodical precision. Experts explained how new technologies allowed them to detect patterns and connections that had been invisible to investigators in 1998. Every detail reinforced the link between the suspect and Emily Harper, leaving little room for doubt. The courtroom, tense and silent, seemed to hold its collective breath, as if the walls themselves were aware of the significance of each revelation. Outside, the community followed the proceedings with rapt attention. News outlets provided continuous coverage, social media buzzed with discussion, and local residents shared updates and speculations. Brooklyn had become a citywide focal point for a story that had once seemed confined to a single street. The emotional resonance was palpable. Relief that a mystery was being resolved, grief for the years lost, anger at the calculated cruelty, and awe at the persistence and skill of those who had finally brought the case to light. Conversations in cafes, on sidewalks, and in homes were dominated by analysis, reflection, and an attempt to process the enormity of what had transpired. The suspect's defense was strategic, attempting to cast doubt on certain aspects of the evidence while acknowledging the overwhelming weight of the forensic and testimonial findings. Alibis, minor discrepancies, and procedural technicalities were explored, yet the foundation of the prosecution's case was undeniable. Each challenge was met with counter-evidence, corroborated witness statements, and meticulous documentation. The courtroom became a battlefield of precision, where every word, gesture, and pause carried significance. The tension was palpable, a silent pressure that pressed on the backs of jurors, lawyers, and spectators alike. During cross-examination, Detective Jensen remained steady, guiding the narrative with unwavering focus. Questions were answered with clarity and precision, each response reinforcing the timeline, the suspect's presence, and the calculated nature of the crime. The suspect's composure began to erode subtly, micro-expressions betraying tension, hesitation, and awareness of the inevitable outcome. The room seemed to tighten around him, every detail of evidence and testimony a cage closing incrementally, a reflection of the meticulous planning he had once executed now being used against him. As the trial moved forward, the psychological dimension of the case became increasingly apparent. Analysts explained the behavioral patterns, the meticulous observation, and the calculated risk-taking that had characterized the suspect's actions. Jurors, observers, and community members alike were confronted with the stark reality of human calculation, the capacity for cold, detached planning, and the subtle manipulation of time and circumstance to evade detection. The narrative was as chilling as it was illuminating, a study in precision, patience, and the profound consequences of predatory intent. Meanwhile, Emily Harper's family attended each session, absorbing every detail, reliving memories of her laughter, her kindness, and the life that had been stolen. Grief and relief intertwined, creating a complex emotional landscape. For them, the trial was both a closure and an opening. Closure in knowing the truth, opening in confronting the magnitude of cruelty that had been inflicted. They bore witness to the unraveling of a cold case, the painstaking reconstruction of events, and the eventual triumph of persistence and justice over time, memory, and manipulation. The prosecution's narrative unfolded like a cinematic sequence, each piece of evidence, each testimony, each expert report building toward the inevitable conclusion. The cold case, once frozen in ambiguity, now pulsed with clarity, every shadow illuminated by meticulous investigation. The jury followed the narrative, connecting timelines, understanding motives, and recognizing the patterns of control and observation that had characterized the suspect's actions. The courtroom, a space of law and judgment, became a theater of revelation, where years of uncertainty were finally translated into incontrovertible truth. In parallel, forensic teams continued to analyze the recovered evidence, confirming details, reinforcing timelines, and eliminating any lingering doubts. Each result, each confirmation, added weight to the narrative, ensuring that the case would withstand scrutiny not only in court, but in the annals of investigative history. The meticulous documentation of processes, timelines, and discoveries highlighted the evolution of investigative methodology over 12 years and demonstrated the interplay between patience, technological advancement, and human perseverance. Throughout the trial, the community remained deeply engaged. Conversations in public spaces reflected a collective processing of trauma, resilience, and curiosity. Residents revisited the streets where Emily had walked, reflecting on the significance of ordinary routines, mundane decisions, and the subtle patterns that had been observed by the suspect. The narrative extended beyond the courtroom, embedding itself in the fabric of daily life, shaping perceptions of safety, trust, and vigilance. Brooklyn, once marked by uncertainty, began to absorb the lessons of case that had defined it for over a decade. As the trial neared its conclusion, closing arguments synthesized years of investigation, evidence, and testimony into a compelling narrative of truth, persistence, and justice. Prosecutors emphasized the calculated planning, the meticulous execution, and the undeniable link between the suspect and Emily Harper. They highlighted the resilience of investigators, the technological advances that enabled breakthroughs, and the unwavering commitment to uncovering the truth. Defense counsel, while articulating procedural concerns and minor discrepancies, could not overcome the overwhelming body of evidence, nor could they diminish the emotional and factual clarity established over 12 years. The courtroom was silent as the jury began deliberations, the collective anticipation nearly tangible. Detective Jensen, along with Emily's family and community observers, waited with a mixture of relief, anxiety, and reflection. The cold case, once a specter haunting files and memories, had been brought into the light, its narrative reconstructed, its resolution imminent. Outside, the city seemed to pulse with shared anticipation, the streets charged with the collective consciousness of a community that had carried the weight of uncertainty for over a decade. In the final hours of deliberation, the impact of persistence, observation, and meticulous investigation became abundantly clear. A crime that had evaded resolution for 12 years had finally been confronted, analyzed, and understood. The courtroom, the evidence, and the testimonies converged into a singular narrative of calculated action, human resilience, and the enduring pursuit of justice. Emily Harper's disappearance, once a haunting enigma, had been transformed into a case study in persistence, forensic innovation, and the complex interplay between human behavior and societal response. The jury's deliberation felt endless, a suspended moment that stretched through hours and into the dim glow of Brooklyn's evening. The courtroom had emptied except for a few staffers and Detective Jensen, who remained, leaning against a wall, reviewing his notes, reliving the months, the years, the relentless chase that had begun in 1998. Outside, the city's lights flickered, shadows of brownstones stretching over cracked sidewalks, as if the streets themselves were waiting for closure. Every window, every alley, every silent corner had once carried fragments of a story no one could fully comprehend, and now the weight of 12 years was about to crystallize in a verdict. Emily Harper's family sat together, hands clasped, shoulders tense, eyes wide with anticipation. Each face reflected a complex tapestry of emotions: grief, relief, anger, hope, fear, all tangled together in the fragile web of memory and justice. For them, the years had been a slow, agonizing rhythm of unanswered questions, holidays shadowed by absence, birthdays that arrived and passed without recognition. Each day had been a small wound, each night a silent scream for clarity, and now the possibility of justice, long deferred, shimmered on the edge of realization. Inside the courtroom, the suspect sat rigid, face pale under the harsh fluorescent lights, fingers intertwined, eyes flicking toward the door, toward Detective Jensen, toward the gallery filled with family, journalists, and the silent weight of 12 years of scrutiny. He had maintained a calculated calm through the trial, a veneer of composure that masked subtle tensions, micro-expressions, slight tremors in his hands when no one was watching. Now, as the jury returned, the room seemed to pulse with unspoken energy, anticipation crackling in the air like static electricity. The judge called the court to order, the gavel striking with authority, and the jury filed in, each step echoing in the high-ceilinged room. They carried with them the deliberations, the careful weighing of evidence, the emotional and intellectual burden of reconstructing a life stolen over a decade ago. The room fell silent as the foreperson stood, clearing their throat, the weight of words about to release 12 years of tension. Each heartbeat felt magnified, each second stretched into eternity. Outside, the streets of Brooklyn mirrored the tension. Conversations halted mid-step, televisions muted, phones held in hands ready to relay the final word. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty. The words cut through the silence like a knife, sharp and precise, leaving an echo that seemed to linger in every corner of the room. Gasps erupted, some quiet, some sharp, as the reality of resolution settled over those present. Emily Harper's family exhaled, a collective release of breath, tears mingling with relief and grief. Detective Jensen allowed himself a small nod, a recognition of years spent in pursuit of truth, a silent acknowledgement that persistence, patience, and meticulous attention to detail had finally yielded justice. The suspect's composure cracked subtly, the cold veneer faltering, revealing the tension, fear, and recognition of the inevitability of consequences. Outside, the city responded. News vans rolled, live broadcasts capturing the reactions of family, neighbors, and community members. Social media erupted with updates, each post, tweet, and comment carrying the collective sense of closure, outrage, and reflection. Brooklyn's streets became a mosaic of emotion, a community collectively processing the weight of a case that had defined them for 12 years. Conversations buzzed in cafes, on stoops, in public squares, reflecting on the meticulous work of law enforcement, the nature of patience, and the profound impact of unresolved trauma. For Detective Jensen, the courtroom drama was only one layer of resolution. The streets, the apartment, the riverbank, all remained etched in memory, reminders of the meticulous puzzle that had been slowly assembled over a decade. Each piece of evidence recovered, each confession extracted, each witness statement corroborated, had contributed to a narrative that was now complete. Yet the emotional resonance lingered. Grief, tension, and reflection were not so easily cataloged. The cold case, while legally closed, continued to echo in minds, streets, and community consciousness. The suspect was escorted from the courtroom, hands cuffed, the finality of judgment pressing down like a weight too heavy for words. Flashbulbs popped, cameras captured fleeting expressions, and reporters documented every nuance, every subtle gesture, every faint tremor in the man who had eluded justice for over a decade. Outside, community members whispered, some crying quietly, others speaking in hushed tones of relief and horror, reflecting on the meticulous planning, the cunning, and the cold detachment that had defined the suspect's actions. Meanwhile, forensic teams revisited the recovered evidence, cataloging final reports, ensuring that every detail was documented, analyzed, and preserved. Fibers, DNA traces, clothing, objects recovered from the riverbank, all were logged meticulously, forming a permanent record of investigation and resolution. Each item carried significance, both tangible and symbolic, representing the painstaking work required to reconstruct a narrative shattered by time, manipulation, and deliberate concealment. The impact on Brooklyn was profound. Schools discussed the case in assemblies, emphasizing awareness, personal safety, and the importance of vigilance. Community centers hosted events reflecting on Emily Harper's life, the consequences of predatory behavior, and the resilience required to overcome trauma. Streets once haunted by uncertainty became symbols of endurance. Conversations shifted from speculation to reflection, and the city collectively processed the emotional weight of a story that had lingered for over a decade. Detective Jensen remained immersed in the aftermath, reviewing timelines, witness statements, and investigative methods. The case had transformed into a study of human behavior, criminal calculation, and forensic innovation. Lessons learned were disseminated among colleagues, influencing approaches to cold cases, investigative persistence, and the integration of evolving technology into law enforcement. The Emily Harper case became a benchmark, illustrating that time is not an insurmountable barrier, that patience and precision can yield truth even after decades of uncertainty. The suspect's incarceration marked a legal resolution, yet the emotional journey continued. Emily's family, while relieved that justice had been achieved, confronted the long-term effects of trauma, the weight of lost time, and the irreversible consequences of a crime executed with precision. Counseling, support groups, and community engagement became vital components in processing the lingering emotional aftermath. The city, too, absorbed the narrative, balancing relief with continued reflection on safety, vigilance, and the nature of human predation. In private, Detective Jensen often revisited the early days of the investigation. He recalled the cold December night in 1998, the initial reports of Emily's disappearance, the overturned chair, the silent apartment, and the haunting gaze of Mr. Whiskers. Each memory was a thread woven into a tapestry of persistence, patience, and professional dedication. The subsequent 12 years of investigation, breakthroughs, confessions, and courtroom drama only deepened the resonance of those initial observations. The case, while concluded in legal terms, continued to shape perceptions, professional approaches, and emotional landscapes. The city, reflecting on the resolution, acknowledged the power of meticulous investigation and the human capacity for endurance. The cold case, once dormant, had been reanimated through forensic science, observational diligence, and relentless pursuit of truth. The culmination of 12 years of effort demonstrated that even the most complex and elusive cases can yield resolution. That time, while complicating, is not an absolute barrier to justice. Communities absorbed these lessons, incorporating vigilance, awareness, and resilience into collective consciousness. Emily Harper's story became emblematic, a case study in persistence, investigative innovation, and human resilience. Schools incorporated lessons on observation and safety, community centers emphasized the importance of collective vigilance, and law enforcement agencies studied the case as a model of cold case resolution. The narrative extended beyond Brooklyn, influencing broader discussions on the dynamics of unresolved crime, the integration of technology into investigation, and the psychological dimensions of both victims and perpetrators. Even as the trial concluded, Detective Jensen reflected on the enduring impact. The streets, the apartment, the riverbank, all remained silent witnesses to a crime that had long been shrouded in mystery. Evidence, witness testimony, and confessions had established factual closure, yet the emotional and psychological echoes persisted. The community, while reassured, continued to navigate a complex landscape of memory, reflection, and collective experience. Emily Harper's presence, once absent and haunting, now occupied a tangible and symbolic space in the fabric of Brooklyn life. As winter turned to spring, memorials and vigils honored Emily's life and the endurance of those who had pursued justice. Candles flickered, photographs were displayed, and community members gathered to reflect on the journey from disappearance to resolution. The narrative, once fragmented and obscured, had been reconstructed, offering both clarity and a somber reminder of the consequences of calculated human behavior. The emotional resonance remained, a testament to the profound impact of a single life lost and the tireless pursuit of truth that had finally illuminated the shadows. Detective Jensen, reflecting on the entirety of the case, understood that the resolution, while legally conclusive, was not the end. The lessons learned, the importance of persistence, meticulous documentation, forensic innovation, and emotional awareness, would inform future investigations, shaping approaches to cold cases for years to come. The Emily Harper case had demonstrated that patience, attention to detail, and unwavering commitment to truth can overcome the barriers imposed by time, memory, and manipulation. And so, as the city absorbed the finality of the trial, Brooklyn carried the weight of history, memory, and resolution. Streets once haunted by uncertainty now bore the imprint of resilience, vigilance, and communal reflection. Families, investigators, and community members alike had witnessed the transformation of a cold case from an enduring shadow into a documented, analyzed, and resolved narrative. Emily Harper's story, though tragic, became a beacon of persistence, a reminder that even in the face of meticulous human cruelty, truth, accountability, and justice can prevail. Brooklyn breathed differently after the verdict, yet the city remained suspended in the residual tension of 12 years finally confronted. Even in the quiet moments, when the streets were dimly lit and the hum of traffic softened, the memory of Emily Harper's disappearance lingered like an indelible shadow. Detective Jensen walked the neighborhood slowly, retracing the path she had once taken, noting the streetlights, the stoops, the faint markings on the sidewalks that had gone unnoticed during the frantic days of investigation. Every corner seemed to hold whispers of the past, reminders that even closure cannot erase the imprint of a carefully executed crime. He paused outside the brownstone where Emily had lived, fingers brushing against the worn railing, eyes fixed on the window that had once framed a life abruptly stolen. The apartment now stood silent, frozen in a tableau that had long resisted resolution. Memories of initial entry flooded him. The overturned chair, the faint scent of perfume, the way Mr. Whiskers had hissed at his presence. That night had been a crucible of uncertainty, a moment when hope and fear intertwined. And now, after years of painstaking effort, the suspect had been convicted, yet the emotional gravity of the event lingered like an echo in the corridors of memory, impossible to dismiss entirely. Detective Jensen reflected on the painstaking reconstruction of Emily's final hours. Surveillance footage, once dismissed as grainy and irrelevant, had been reevaluated, revealing fleeting images of the suspect's movements. Witness statements, minor inconsistencies, and small details that had seemed insignificant at the time were now understood as critical components of a complex puzzle. Phone records traced subtle patterns of communication, revealing a level of forethought and calculation that chilled even the most seasoned investigators. The suspect's precision had been formidable, his evasion methodical, his detachment absolute. And yet, persistence, technology, and methodical patience had prevailed. The trial itself had left indelible marks on everyone involved. Emily's family, while relieved by the conviction, confronted the long-term ramifications of trauma, grief, and loss. They navigated a complex, emotional landscape, balancing relief with the recognition that years could never be restored. Community members engaged in public dialogues. Schools revisited safety protocols, and neighborhood watch programs were reinvigorated, reflecting a collective effort to process, understand, and prevent similar tragedies. The city's consciousness, once shadowed by uncertainty, began to recalibrate, absorbing lessons of vigilance, observation, and communal resilience. Forensic analysts continued to refine their reports, meticulously documenting every recovered fiber, DNA trace, and object retrieved from the riverbank. Each fragment of evidence was cataloged and cross-referenced, forming an unassailable narrative of premeditation and execution. Clothing fibers linked to the suspect, traced DNA, confirming his presence at the apartment, and recovered objects from the riverbank collectively substantiated the prosecution's timeline. The meticulous documentation underscored the evolution of investigative science over the past decade, highlighting how persistence and technology can converge to illuminate even the most elusive cold cases. Detective Jensen spent long hours reviewing the psychological profile constructed for the suspect. Behavioral analysts had detailed his calculated observation of Emily, his patient orchestration of the crime, and his meticulous evasion of scrutiny over the years. Each detail revealed a chilling clarity, a mind attuned to manipulation, control, and meticulous planning. There was no emotional impulse, no reckless violence, only clinical precision. Jensen understood that confronting such calculated cruelty required not only methodical investigation, but also a psychological resilience that could absorb the weight of darkness without fracturing. Brooklyn streets continued to carry the weight of collective memory. Neighbors spoke of Emily with reverence, recounting moments from her life that had long been overshadowed by tragedy. Candlelight vigils, memorials, and community gatherings honored her presence, reinforcing a sense of solidarity among residents. The city absorbed the resolution as both a lesson and a warning, understanding that vigilance, observation, and community engagement are crucial defenses against calculated predation. Conversations shifted from speculation to reflection, emphasizing resilience, awareness, and the importance of communal cohesion. The suspect's incarceration marked a legal closure, yet the broader narrative of emotional and psychological impact persisted. Emily's family navigated grief that had been suspended for 12 years, confronting memories that had grown more vivid with the passage of time. Counseling, support networks, and community engagement provided mechanisms for processing these complex emotions. The city, while legally reassured, continued to grapple with the symbolic and emotional resonance of the case. Streets once shadowed by uncertainty now bore the imprint of collective reflection, vigilance, and cautious optimism. Detective Jensen revisited the riverbank where Emily's belongings had been recovered. The water, cold and relentless, mirrored the passage of time and the patient persistence required to uncover hidden truths. Recovered fibers, objects, and traces of DNA had transformed a once opaque mystery into a coherent narrative of crime, observation, and consequence. Each detail reinforced the reality of calculated human behavior, illustrating both the potential for cruelty and the power of persistence. Jensen walked slowly along the edge, the faint murmur of water against stone a quiet accompaniment to memories of investigation, pursuit, and eventual resolution. The trial, the confession, and the conviction became a case study for law enforcement. Cold cases, often assumed dormant or unsolvable, demonstrated the potential for resolution through methodical investigation, technological advancement, and psychological insight. Patterns of behavior, previously overlooked inconsistencies, and advances in forensic analysis coalesced to create a blueprint for addressing cases long considered closed. Brooklyn and the broader law enforcement community absorbed these lessons, understanding that time is a factor, not an obstacle, and that persistence and innovation can yield justice even after years of ambiguity. Emily Harper's story became emblematic of resilience, both personal and communal. Schools incorporated discussions of observation, safety, and vigilance. Community centers hosted forums on crime prevention, and law enforcement agencies studied the case to refine approaches to cold cases and investigative persistence. The narrative extended beyond the immediate community, influencing broader discussions on forensic methodology, criminal psychology, and the ethical imperatives of relentless pursuit of truth. The tragedy of Emily's disappearance became intertwined with a narrative of resolution, creating a complex tapestry of caution, awareness, and communal responsibility. Detective Jensen, reflecting on the entirety of the investigation, understood that closure is multifaceted. Legal resolution, while essential, represents only one dimension. Emotional closure, communal reassurance, and the restoration of a sense of safety are ongoing processes, often extending far beyond the courtroom. The cold case, once frozen in uncertainty, had been brought into clarity, yet the emotional and symbolic ramifications continued to shape perceptions, decisions, and behaviors. The pursuit of justice is never entirely finite. It extends into memory, culture, and community consciousness. As Brooklyn absorbed the impact of the conviction, residents revisited familiar streets with heightened awareness. Observations of ordinary routines, previously unnoticed behaviors, and minor patterns became points of reflection. The community internalized lessons of vigilance, emphasizing observation, reporting, and cohesion. The city's consciousness, long shadowed by the unknown, now embraced a more nuanced understanding of human behavior, criminal predation, and the value of persistent investigation. Emily Harper's life, once abruptly cut short, became a lens through which resilience, vigilance, and the relentless pursuit of justice were illuminated. In private, Detective Jensen often revisited the sequence of breakthroughs that had led to resolution. Surveillance footage reanalyzed, witness statements re-examined, and forensic advancements applied retrospectively had all contributed to the unraveling of the cold case. Every subtle clue, once dismissed or overlooked, became pivotal when revisited with new tools, new perspectives, and unwavering persistence. The case illustrated the intersection of time, technology, and human determination, demonstrating that resolution is possible even when a crime has remained in shadow for over a decade. The psychological dimension of the suspect's actions remained a point of reflection. Behavioral analysts had reconstructed patterns of observation, planning, and execution that revealed a mind operating with cold detachment. Every decision, every maneuver, every calculated risk highlighted the interplay between intellect and predation. For Detective Jensen and his colleagues, understanding these patterns was not merely an academic exercise. It was a critical component of preventing future occurrences and ensuring that lessons learned could inform investigative strategy. As spring progressed, memorials and community gatherings commemorated Emily Harper's life, reinforcing awareness, resilience, and collective responsibility. Streets once defined by uncertainty were now infused with the memory of investigation, persistence, and communal vigilance. The case became a touchstone for public discourse, highlighting the importance of observation, patience, and relentless pursuit of truth. Brooklyn, forever marked by the event, carried forward both the memory of tragedy and the demonstration of resolution achieved through dedication, expertise, and unyielding focus. Detective Jensen understood that the case, while legally closed, would remain alive in the consciousness of the city. Emily Harper's story, her life, and the pursuit of justice would continue to inform conversations, policy, and individual behaviors. The cold case, once dormant, had illuminated the power of persistence, the efficacy of technological and forensic innovation, and the enduring importance of community awareness. Even as closure was declared in legal terms, the narrative of resilience, observation, and vigilance remained active, shaping the collective memory of Brooklyn for years to come. And so, the city moved forward. Streets remained familiar, yet forever altered. Community conversations shifted from fear to reflection, awareness, and vigilance. Emily Harper's life, her disappearance, and the eventual resolution of the case became a symbol, both cautionary and inspirational, underscoring the human capacity for persistence, the necessity of observation, and the potential for justice to prevail even after years of uncertainty. Detective Jensen, walking home past the river and the brownstones, understood that while the investigation had concluded, the story and its echoes would resonate long into the future, a chilling reminder and a testament to the relentless pursuit of truth. Even as Brooklyn tried to breathe normally, the imprint of Emily Harper's disappearance lingered in every corner, every alleyway, every faintly illuminated stoop. Detective Jensen walked those streets late at night, retracing her familiar paths, noticing details that had once seemed mundane but now carried the weight of memory and investigation. The city was quieter in these hours, the hum of distant traffic muted, as if the streets themselves held their collective breath, waiting to absorb the echoes of resolution and the faint residue of unresolved tension. Shadows stretched longer in the lamplight, twisting across brick walls, reflecting the subtle interplay between what had been and what could never be fully reclaimed. Inside the precinct, files stacked high, labeled meticulously by date, location, and evidentiary relevance, represented more than data. They were fragments of lives interrupted, moments frozen in time, and pieces of a puzzle painstakingly reconstructed over 12 years. Detective Jensen ran his fingers over the folders, recalling the early days of investigation. The frantic phone calls, the neighbor interviews, the nights spent combing through evidence under dim fluorescent lights. Each paper, each photograph, each notation was a testament to patience, determination, and the relentless pursuit of truth in a world where time often obscures clarity. The suspect, now in custody, had begun to reveal more than the initial confession. Subtle inconsistencies, small details previously withheld, and psychological nuances emerged under careful questioning, shedding light on the breadth of observation and calculation that had defined his actions. Every revelation was like a shard of glass, painful, precise, and illuminating. Detective Jensen, while methodical and controlled, felt the weight of human curiosity mingled with horror. Understanding the calculated mind behind Emily Harper's disappearance required both intellectual rigor and emotional resilience, a duality that had defined the entirety of the cold case investigation. Back in the community, residents reflected on the past 12 years, reconstructing their memories with new clarity. Conversations shifted from rumor to reality, from fear to acknowledgement, from the abstract unknown to the tangible consequences of human behavior. Streets once haunted by speculation now bore the imprint of awareness, vigilance, and collective memory. Candlelight vigils, memorial gatherings, and neighborhood meetings served as mechanisms for processing grief, celebrating resilience, and reinforcing communal bonds. Emily Harper's life, tragically cut short, had catalyzed a profound societal reflection, transforming ordinary spaces into living memorials of both vulnerability and perseverance. Technological advancements played a pivotal role in untangling the threads of the cold case. Surveillance footage from surrounding buildings, once dismissed as grainy and irrelevant, was reanalyzed using enhanced imaging techniques, revealing fleeting glimpses of the suspect's movements. Fiber analysis linked objects recovered from the riverbank to items in his possession. DNA traces corroborated witness statements, and phone metadata illuminated patterns of calculated communication. Each breakthrough highlighted the intersection of technology and human persistence, demonstrating that even the most elusive mysteries can be approached methodically and ultimately resolved. The courtroom had been a crucible, a stage upon which years of investigation, evidence, and human emotion converged. Testimonies recounted the minutiae of Emily's final hours. Forensic analyses revealed the calculated nature of her disappearance, and the psychological profile of the suspect laid bare a mind operating with chilling precision. For Detective Jensen, each session reinforced the significance of patience, observation, and methodological rigor. The jury, absorbing every detail, reconstructed the narrative in their collective consciousness, culminating in a verdict that represented both legal resolution and symbolic justice. Yet, even after the conviction, the emotional landscape remained complex. Emily's family grappled with relief tempered by grief, mourning a life interrupted and years irretrievably lost. Their experiences underscored the multidimensional nature of closure, which extends beyond legal adjudication into emotional, social, and psychological territories. Community members processed the case collectively, sharing memories, recounting experiences, and reinforcing vigilance. Brooklyn's consciousness had been forever shaped by the narrative, its streets, conversations, and collective psyche carrying the enduring echoes of a life taken too soon. Detective Jensen frequently revisited the riverbank, where the final pieces of evidence had been recovered. The water flowed relentlessly, indifferent to the passage of time, mirroring both the persistence of investigation and the inexorable weight of memory. Objects retrieved from the river, fibers, personal items, and remnants of a struggle, have been painstakingly cataloged, analyzed, and contextualized, forming an evidentiary backbone that transforms speculation into documented truth. Each artifact represented both the vulnerability of Emily Harper and the meticulous orchestration of the crime, a chilling juxtaposition of innocence and calculated malice. Psychological analysts emphasize the significance of the suspect's behavior, highlighting the interplay between observation, manipulation, and control. His actions were neither impulsive nor erratic. They were deliberate, measured, and calculated with clinical detachment. Understanding this pattern was critical for investigators and the community alike, emphasizing the importance of vigilance, pattern recognition, and proactive engagement with subtle cues. The cold case, while legally resolved, served as a broader lesson in human behavior, demonstrating that meticulous observation can both prevent and expose predation, depending on how information is interpreted and acted upon. Memorial events continued, creating spaces for communal reflection and reconciliation. Residents revisited familiar streets, observing the rhythms of daily life with renewed awareness. Schools incorporated discussions about observation, safety, and collective responsibility, fostering a culture of vigilance informed by real-world events. Community centers hosted forums and workshops, transforming tragedy into opportunity for education, dialogue, and empowerment. Brooklyn, while shaped by grief, had cultivated resilience, weaving the lessons of the cold case into the city's collective consciousness. Forensic reports, continually refined, illuminated the precision and premeditation inherent in the suspect's actions. DNA evidence, fiber matches, and trace analyses converged to construct a coherent timeline of events, reinforcing the credibility of witness statements and confessions. Each finding underscored the meticulous planning, observation, and execution that had characterized the crime. Detective Jensen, reviewing the final reports, marveled at the interplay between human persistence and technological advancement, recognizing that resolution required both emotional endurance and analytical rigor. The community's reaction was multifaceted, blending relief, reflection, and cautious optimism. Streets, once defined by suspicion and uncertainty, became spaces of awareness, vigilance, and shared memory. Conversations shifted from speculation to understanding, emphasizing the importance of observation, reporting, and collective responsibility. Emily Harper's story, though marked by tragedy, became a reference point for resilience, communal engagement, and the capacity of persistent investigation to illuminate hidden truths. Even in moments of solitude, Detective Jensen felt the lingering presence of the case. Walking along familiar streets, revisiting the apartment and riverbank, and reviewing evidence files, he absorbed the echoes of 12 years of pursuit. Each memory, each trace of evidence, each revelation formed a continuous thread connecting past uncertainty to present resolution. The cold case, while legally closed, remained alive in his consciousness, a testament to the enduring impact of human behavior, meticulous investigation, and the relentless pursuit of truth. The suspect's incarceration marked the formal conclusion of legal proceedings, yet the broader narrative persisted. Emotional, social, and communal dimensions of closure continued to evolve, reflecting the complex interplay between justice, grief, and collective memory. Emily Harper's life, her disappearance, and the eventual resolution of the cold case became embedded in the cultural consciousness of Brooklyn, influencing behavior, awareness, and the practices of both residents and law enforcement professionals. Community programs emphasize the significance of vigilance, observation, and rapid reporting. Schools integrated lessons from the case, highlighting the role of pattern recognition, situational awareness, and responsible engagement. Neighborhood associations developed protocols for monitoring and reporting unusual behavior, creating networks of collective responsibility. Brooklyn, while marked by a profound tragedy, cultivated resilience through reflection, adaptation, and the integration of lessons learned from the cold case into everyday life. Detective Jensen revisited early investigative breakthroughs, noting how small details, once dismissed or overlooked, had proven critical in reconstructing the sequence of events. Surveillance reanalysis, forensic advancements, and witness corroboration converged to create a detailed, verifiable timeline. Each revelation reinforced the principle that persistence, methodical documentation, and critical reevaluation of evidence are essential in resolving cold cases. The Emily Harper case became a template, illustrating that clarity can emerge even after years of ambiguity, provided that attention to detail, patience, and technological innovation are applied with rigor. The trial and conviction demonstrated the intersection of human psychology, forensic science, and legal procedure. Behavioral patterns, carefully documented and analyzed, revealed the suspect's meticulous planning and strategic manipulation. Forensic evidence validated witness statements and confessions, creating an unassailable narrative of crime and consequence. The community absorbed the lessons implicitly, internalizing principles of vigilance, observation, and proactive engagement with potential threats. Brooklyn, once haunted by uncertainty, began to reconcile with its past, translating grief and fear into understanding and preparedness. In the weeks following the conviction, Detective Jensen conducted debriefings, sharing insights with colleagues, forensic teams, and law enforcement agencies. The case became a reference point, illustrating how persistence, technological integration, and meticulous documentation can unravel even the most elusive cold cases. Lessons learned were disseminated widely, influencing investigative strategy, cold case management, and psychological profiling. Emily Harper's case became both a cautionary tale and a model of procedural excellence, demonstrating that clarity and justice are attainable through unwavering commitment and methodical analysis. Brooklyn, meanwhile, continued to process the emotional and social ramifications. Streets, once marked by suspicion, now carried a heightened sense of awareness. Community gatherings focused on resilience, reflection, and collective engagement. Schools, civic organizations, and neighborhood watch programs integrated lessons from the case into curricula, policies, and daily practice. Emily Harper's life, her disappearance, and the eventual resolution of the cold case had transformed public consciousness, shaping perceptions of safety, responsibility, and the importance of persistent vigilance. Even as spring deepened into early summer, Brooklyn carried the invisible weight of Emily Harper's story. Detective Jensen walked the familiar streets with a measured pace, noting the subtle changes. The new streetlights installed after neighborhood advocacy, the freshly painted stoops, the faint hum of renewed urban life. Yet beneath the veneer of normalcy, shadows remained, a lingering imprint of the cold case that had defined 12 years of collective tension. Every corner, every alley, every intersection seemed to whisper fragments of a past that refused to fade, echoing the meticulous planning and calculated detachment of a suspect who had evaded justice for over a decade. In the precinct, Jensen revisited evidence reports with the meticulous care of a craftsman examining a masterpiece. Fiber samples, DNA traces, and recovered personal effects had long since been cataloged, yet each item still held significance. A reminder that even the smallest details had contributed to reconstructing a night frozen in memory. He traced the sequence of discoveries, how a grainy security camera frame had revealed fleeting movements, how subtle phone patterns had confirmed timelines, how microscopic fibers had tied the suspect irrevocably to the scene. Each connection was a triumph of patience and analytical rigor, a demonstration of how methodical persistence can illuminate truths long obscured by time and circumstance. The suspect, now fully incarcerated, remained a subject of ongoing study. Behavioral analysts dissected his demeanor, his precise recollection of events, and his systematic approach to avoiding detection. Every action, every statement, every hesitation revealed a mind trained to calculate, to observe, and to manipulate. There was no remorse, only the cold recounting of a plan executed with precision, a narrative delivered with detachment that chilled even the most seasoned investigators. Detective Jensen understood that confronting such calculated evil required a careful balance. Intellectual comprehension paired with emotional resilience, a duality necessary to process and close the case without being consumed by its darkness. Meanwhile, Brooklyn itself continued to process the collective trauma. Neighborhood meetings discussed the events, reflecting on the lessons learned from observation, vigilance, and the importance of community engagement. Residents revisited the streets Emily had once walked, noting small details, traffic patterns, lighting, sight lines that might have contributed to awareness or vulnerability. Schools incorporated her story into safety curricula, emphasizing both practical strategies and the emotional impact of crime. Community centers hosted forums on vigilance, resilience, and the importance of communication, transforming tragedy into an opportunity for reflection and empowerment. Technological advancements had been critical in resolving the cold case, and their implications continued to influence investigative methodology. Advanced imaging techniques, reanalysis of archival surveillance, and enhanced forensic software allowed investigators to reconstruct moments once lost to grainy footage or overlooked details. Phone metadata and geolocation evidence, previously dismissed as inconclusive, revealed patterns of meticulous planning, movement, and observation. Each breakthrough reinforced the principle that persistence, combined with evolving technology, can unearth truths previously deemed unattainable, transforming cold cases from dormant files into fully illuminated narratives. Detective Jensen often revisited the riverbank where Emily's belongings had been recovered.